Hello, and welcome to my presentation. Today I am going to talk about deforestation, specifically using artificial photosynthesis to minimize deforestation effects. So, first off, what is deforestation? Deforestation is the permanent removal of trees to use the land for something besides forest. Typically, this is done for agriculture, either cattle ranching or soybean farming, or something along those lines. Secondary uses are for housing developments or using the timber for fuel or construction. In the last 50 years, 17% of the Amazon rainforest has been destroyed due to deforestation. Additionally, the annual global rate of deforestation between 2015 and 2020 has been about 10 million hectares, which is about the size of Kentucky. So, if you can imagine forest land the size of Kentucky being removed from the globe every year, that is a sizable problem for many different reasons. What are the effects that deforestation has on the globe, and specifically on human life? So, if you think about deforestation, removing trees, one of the major impacts is climate change. We are having an issue where there are too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that is causing an increase in global temperature. Studies found that in land cleared right next to the forest, that temperature increased up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not good for the local climate and does have impact on the global climate as well, because as you remove trees, you remove one of your major sources of CO2 intake, the other major resource being the ocean. And if you remove trees, you drastically reduce the amount of CO2 that you're taking in from the atmosphere. As you accumulate CO2, the overall atmosphere gets warmer as well. In 2019, nearly 2,000 disasters, including floods and forest fires, caused over 24.9 million people to be displaced, which is about 3 times the amount that are displaced due to war and violence. So this is becoming a big issue for a lot of people. Additionally, as you take away those trees, the ground cover is a lot more susceptible to forest fires because there's nothing preventing direct sunlight and high winds to cause sparks, which creates more forest fires. So we're going to see those numbers increase as deforestation continues. Another issue is disease prevalence. As you're taking away those forests, it has been proven that 1% decrease in forest cover actually leads to an increase of 10% in malarial incidents. Now, a couple of theories of why that is you're cutting down the habitat of the mosquitoes, so they're moving closer to populated towns. And also, when you cut down those trees, you have a lot of direct sunlight and standing water in puddles after rain, which is a good breeding habitat for mosquitoes. So you're actually increasing the mosquito population as well. Additionally, 80% of land-based species live in forests, and 65% of the 10,000 endangered species on this planet live in tropical forests. So when we're taking down those trees, we're destroying that habitat, and these animals have to move elsewhere or die out. Another impact of this is we're seeing a lot more wildlife-human conflict, which usually ends in either human deaths if it's a predator species, or animal death as humans kill them for getting into their territory. Additionally, 80% of the world's population still relies on traditional medicine. As we remove those trees and kill off huge swaths of land, we're getting rid of all of those plants that are absolutely necessary for this traditional medicine, and we're going to see a lot more people suffering because of the lack of medication. The last effect is on the global water cycle. So when you have forest land, the canopy cover contains moisture within the forest, and the roots of the trees contain water, which keeps the ground wet. If you remove all of those trees, there's a lot less water in the soil, and there's no condensation in the air. So you create a lot drier climate. If you create a drier climate, this affects things like drinking water, waterways, aquatic habitats, flood and dam control, which relates back to that natural disaster effect, and soil erosion. So if you have soil erosion, not only does that make it harder for us to keep trees in one place, but it makes it really hard to grow crops because there's not enough water, which kind of is counterproductive for removing the trees for agricultural purposes. So, what are current solutions to this issue? Many people are saying plant a tree. Don't buy palm oil, as that industry is largely supported by logging land for space. Reduce your meat consumption. If you eat less meat, then the demand for meat won't be as high, and these cattle ranchers won't have to have as much cattle to meet demand. On a larger scale, we are trying to fight illegal logging. That is one of the main issues that specifically the Amazon is having, and also create laws to protect the forest within each country and globally so that we have stronger consequences for that logging when it's not sustainable. Ultimately, we would like to have sustainable forest management so that we can balance agriculture and timber for fuel and still maintain that forest growth. So, my proposed device uses artificial photosynthesis. So, this technology was introduced by the University of Cambridge in 2020. This uses a ruthenium complex which has strong oxidative power. So, what you have is this complex, and it converts water into O2 and H. That H plus is then moved down to a strontium complex where it combines with CO2 to convert into formic acid. Now, this is a gold layer. It is very good for conducting electrons. So the gold layer is used to conduct those electrons because it is very good at that. And additionally, it's photocatalyzed. That means we need sunlight to make this reaction happen. But it doesn't need outside sources like electricity to produce this reaction. Additionally, we have this co-catalyst, COTPYP. And what this does is it just helps manage that conversion of CO2 to formic acid. Now, the active area of this is about 5.7 centimeters by 6 centimeters. So that's a fair amount of space that can be coated in this gold layer with these complexes and produce a lot of formic acid. Additionally, this is covered in an aqueous solution of CO2. So what the goal is to make a housing unit, hopefully out of transparent TPU, because it's able to be flexible and 3D printed, which would reduce cost of the overall device. So this gold layer would be inside the TPU, and it would be coated with an aqueous solution of CO2, where we pulled CO2 in from the air and water from rainwater sources. That way, this would be able to occur without any outside sources. This aqueous solution coats the gold layer and the catalysts, converts water and CO2 to formic acid, which causes an increase in CO2 intake, which is a large issue, which has that climate change impact because it is a greenhouse gas. So what is the effectiveness of this device? Cambridge found that the selectivity was 97% for formic acid. This is very good because if you look at some of these other things, It could create CO or H2, and basically we want to prevent any release of more greenhouse gases that would be counterproductive for our goal. And we just want to produce formic acid because that has a real life use that I'll explain later on. Additionally, it has a solar to formic conversion efficiency of 0.08%. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but the absolute maximum that we have ever done so far is about 7%. So, research is still being put into this, and eventually we will see that number increase. Water collection. So, how are we going to actually collect that water so that we can create that aqueous CO2 solution? We are going to replicate rice leaves. So rice leaves are unique in the fact that they are self-cleaning and they are very super hydrophobic. So how this works is they have channels and micro grooves on their leaves, which cause the droplet to roll along the leaf. We're going to create different heights of TPU so that when a water droplet hits our device, it rolls in an anisotropic manner, and it can roll towards the end of the stalk and be collected in that stalk. Additionally, this method will clean the material so we won't have to worry about contaminants blocking sunlight, which could potentially decrease the efficiency of the device. This water will have to be filtered. There will be a filtration device within the stock which will help remove all of those particulates that it just cleaned off the device, and then we'll have pure water to mix in with our atmospheric CO2. So how is this going to look? This is what I'm visualizing for a roof design. So what you have is a multi-tiered device where you have these large surface areas imitating the shape of a leaf. Now, we're going to place this on a roof, and this has a couple of different effects. First, we want to take up no additional space. One of the main reasons why deforestation happens in the first place is that they want to make more space for cattle and for housing developments. If we put this on roofs of structures, we won't have to take up ground space, therefore, less ground coverage will be used. Additionally, this allows for easy water collection because rainwater will run right in there. It won't be prevented by larger structures. And the formic acid that is produced by this reaction can be drained into a collection bin that's secured on the edge of the roof. The farmer will only have to collect that formic acid about once a day, which will reduce the amount of time they have to dedicate to maintaining these devices and make them more likely to use them properly. Additionally, you can fit a bunch of these devices on each roof, which will increase the amount of formic acid production and ultimately the cost benefit as well. If you have more, you produce more formic acid and they'll pay themselves off sooner. So this is great for a rural setting where there's actual habitat, but what about solving that issue of birds and land destruction? So another design is to scale these devices up. They're about the size of short trees, and we still get this formic acid accumulation and production, but the birds can also use these stalks to build their nests. So birds can use surrounding hay and twigs that are still left after the deforestation and the farming, and they can create nests in these structures where there weren't trees before. This won't impact the device because most of these birds build nests, not try to dig into the trees. And that'll allow many bird species to remain in the area despite not having trees. Additionally, having larger leaves means more surface area. You can generate more formic acid production and CO2 intake. So what are the benefits of this device? First and foremost, the production of formic acid. Formic acid is actually used as a livestock feed preservative. Farmers just spray it directly on fresh hay, and it's been proven to retain the nutrition for longer during the winter. So, if farmers can collect this formic acid, simply spray it on their crop, and then their cattle will remain healthier for longer through that winter when there's not as much growth. Additionally, you can use it for the tanning and textile industry. So, the excess formic acid produced could be sold by farmers to interested parties. So, then you have a dual income where you have your cattle income, maybe you have your hay income, and then you also have formic acid income. Additionally, for the environment, we have increased absorption of CO2 and no release of greenhouse gases. This is very important to try to help combat that climate change aspect of deforestation. You also have habitats for birds. Um, Ideally, this would be scaled up so that small mammals and insects could also live within these structures. But for now, we're going to focus on bird habitats as it doesn't impact the device structure at all. And you could also place this in the ground for soil erosion. If you plant this in the ground, specifically in that 6-foot habitat design, you could have excess water drip through the stalk into the soil, which will create a wetter soil, prevent soil erosion, and ultimately help grass grow around these devices. Future expansion, what do I envision for this design? Ultimately, I'd like to graft the device into a live tree so that the water source of the device is the xylem itself. This would allow for the use of trees and forests that are already there to produce this formic acid and increase the uptake of CO2 even more. Additionally, it would be an easy way to help prevent these species from being logged because we do have devices implanted within them that would be protected by a business. Also, I'd like to reduce the amount of catalyst needed. One of the main issues for this device is that optimal production requires the catalyst to be replenished about every 7 hours. This is a huge inconvenience for farmers as well as an added cost. So we'd like to either reduce the amount of catalyst needed or find a way to increase the productivity of the catalyst so this is not needed to be replenished. Additionally, part of the sale of each device should go towards lobbying new laws that prevent logging and protect forests in the first place and maintain that sustainable forest outlook. Here are my references. Thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.